Yeah, the hot spring again. Yeah. Water's hot as hell today, supposedly, and I got the place to myself. You know, if I have the place to myself, I'm going to turn on the camera because it's just thrilling to hold this brand new, very expensive phone over all this water, which is at, I think, about 110 degrees. Yeah, so no boontongs this week. I think 2 weeks is the cycle for boontongs. So it'll go a boontongs, a monologue of boontongs, a monologue of boontongs, a monologue. So yeah, if you're not interested in a monologue about what Steve's thinking about this week, carry on. Thank you for dropping in. Like, subscribe, share. So I don't know. I've been talking to people online about retirement. I don't know why. That's just been the theme this week. And I wanted to share with you two things that have stuck with me my whole life, since the 80s anyway. When People magazine was launched, I thought that was the most brilliant magazine in the world. Stories of people's lives, rich, wealthy people, and Joe Schmo in this, you know, in Podunk, Wyoming. And they were able to find drama in everybody's life. So two lives have stuck with me all these years, and they have to do with retirement. So the first was a guy, I can't remember his name, but he was a science fiction writer in the 20s and 30s and 40s and 50s. He wrote pulp novels. He wrote under a variety of names, I think probably never under his own name, but he contributed to Tom Swift, and he contributed to a lot of the juvenile science fiction of the age. And in the 30s, when he was, I think, in his 30s, he and his wife took their young daughter, I think she was about 10, to Europe to do the grand tour. They were Americans, and they went to Europe in the late 1930s, 36, 37, I'm thinking. And one day in Paris, the mother and the daughter left the hotel room to go shopping, and they never came back, and he never saw them again. And he stayed in Europe and tried to find them for a couple years, but the war broke out, and he got driven out by, you know, World War II, and went home and continued writing science fiction and wondering where his family went. And after the war, he'd go back periodically. He'd hire private detectives, he hired consultants, he hired psychics, he talked to the police in every little podunk suburb of Paris. And when he got in his 60s, he stopped writing and he retired to France and continued the search. And he did that till he died in his 80s. I read this, it was an obituary in People magazine in the 1980s. So he was in his 80s, and he had spent virtually his whole adult life looking for his lost wife and child with no success, without ever finding any kind of clue. And I imagine this was a man who was glad to die, because by that point you have to assume if I'm ever going to find an answer to this question, it will be after my death. I'm never going to find an answer in this life. So I imagine he welcomed death at the end, and probably in his last few years he was hoping for it, I'm sure, and looking forward to it, to finally knowing, if he was ever going to know at all, the answer to his question. And if he didn't find out on death, then it's oblivion, and that's fine too. So that's something that I've always thought about in connection to retirement. It's a terribly romantic story. That guy in his retirement spent his days doing the most important thing he could have found to do, hunting for his missing wife and child. And I've got, you know, relationships in my life that haunt me to this day, that I'd like to go back and find again. I think we probably all do. So that's one story. The other story is about a prima ballerina. Again, this is from People magazine. It wasn't an obituary, but it stuck with me for 40 years. So this woman was a prima ballerina, a very good professional ballerina in New York City. She was married to her stage manager. But ballerinas have very brief professional careers, if they have a professional career at all. And she had to retire in her late 20s. She probably stuck around to teach for a while, but eventually I think in her 30s, she wanted to leave New York City. Her husband retired, and they had some money. They never had children, and they went out west, and they bought an old opera house in some podunk little town in Utah or Nevada or Arizona. And there's a lot of opera houses in America and the western states. During the mining boom of the 1800s, very wealthy little tiny towns would spring up in the desert. And the first thing they did when they got some money is they bought an opera house so they could get the touring operas to come through, and they'd have a little bit of something to do on a Saturday night. These were terribly wealthy men who had absolutely nothing to do. And so they bought an opera house. And they thrived. That industry thrived for, I suppose, 50 years or so, and then vaudeville took over, and then movies took over, and these buildings became movie theaters. But by the 60s, the 70s, they were, for the most part, either purchased by the state and given to the town as a community center and refurbished into offices and gymnasiums and clinics and things like that, or they were simply boarded up and put on the market. And she bought one of those. They fixed it up. They spent some money to refurbish it, turn it into a nice performance space again. And with her husband stage managing and doing all the technical work, this woman started putting on lone solo ballet shows in this little tiny ghost town in the middle of the desert. Excerpts from Swan Lake, from Orpheus and Fairs, from The English Cat, whatever. And she started, people started coming because still there was nothing to do in this little town. There may have been 100 souls in this town, but they all came on a Saturday night. And people eventually would drive in from ranches and farms and cult compounds within 100 miles. They'd drive in on a Saturday night to see this one woman perform ballet. And when I read this article in the 80s, she was finally retiring from performing, but by then the state had bought the building, and it was a community theater, and they were putting on their own shows, and still some road shows would come through. And so she spent, her career in retirement. What stuck with me was her career in retirement was twice as long or 3 times as long as her professional career, doing what she loved. And I think that's what I want to do with my retirement. I want to put on shows for my neighbors. Well, my neighbors, physical neighbors at the moment, don't speak English. They wouldn't understand. They've looked, they've tried. I swear to God, they're so sweet. They try to look at my Chong YouTube. A lot of them call me YouTube. But they can't. They don't get it without the language. I'm very verbal, right? I'm very, very much about the language. And so my physical neighbors can't enjoy the YouTube channel. So my neighbors are the people online, the 1,000 subscribers who subscribe to this channel. And boy, do I appreciate you. I hope that I give you 20 minutes to look at every week, 10 minutes on a week like this one, I promise. Because this water is hot as hell. I'm telling you, I got to drink, I got to hydrate. This is really hot today. When there's nobody in it with you, sorry. It's super clean. I don't know if you can see the bottom there. It's super clean and super hot. Anyway, yeah, it's too hot. I got to get out for a minute. So thank you for watching. That's it. That's all I want to do. I want to share these 2 stories about retirement. I have done that. Credit where credit is due to People magazine. That was, that magazine when it began, it was like somebody looked inside Steve Ross's head and designed a magazine just for him. I wish I could say that was the New Yorker, but it's not. I'm too lowbrow for the New Yorker. Boy's Life, about Boy Scouts. Yeah, I dig that. All right, anyway, that's it. Thank you for listening. Like, subscribe, share, hit my PayPal, buy me a cup of coffee, whatever. Just come back next week, leave a comment, and I love you to death. I really do. Thank you for spending this time with me. You're very patient. Bye.